Okay, welcome everyone to this third Business Education in the Anthropocene webinar. Today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Professor Dev Jennings from the University of Alberta. Dev is a very well-known scholar. He's a friend of some of us. He's been publishing very much both on the research aspects of sustainability, of course, but also the pedagogical aspects of sustainability and what it's like to enter the Anthropocene from a business school standpoint and a business student's standpoint. Dev, thank you so much for accepting the invitation, and now the floor is yours.
Ça, c'est mon plaisir. Je m'appelle Dev Jennings. I'm coming from Canada. Thanks a lot. My French is, rusty. Once upon a time, I studied in Blois and went to Tours for a bit. But that was a long time ago. So I won't endeavor to speak much. Don't want to hurt your ears. Yeah, it's great. I'm just setting up for a conversation, I gather. So I was trying to give you a bit of background, and I also wanted to engage with the specific questions of the webinar series. So I've sort of designed the presentation accordingly. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read any of the work that I've been involved in or Andy Hoffman has done, but I'm drawing on that and some other work that's with different colleagues. So I'll try to compress that into this brief overview. So I still, even though, the Anthropocene as an epoch has been voted down by the geophysicists, at least on this round, I'm still a devotee to thinking about the Anthropocene because I'm sure you guys would be sympathetic. It's a systems approach to trying to gather lots of information about the biosphere and how it engages with the social sphere, but especially the biosphere. And it's organized over time, and the Stockholm Institute's been pretty committed to trying to do measurement-based analysis of it. And so, we still see lots of boundaries being, really in trouble. When you look at the snapshots they've put together over the last 10, 12 years, things, we all know that things are not getting better, they're getting worse. And climate change on the left, with temperature climate change gets a lot, and it's one quadrant here. But one of the other important things that we can't address today, but I hope maybe in the question period will come up, is it's very, very clear that we have things like biosphere that are not getting the same attention. The land system changes are also, and we spend a lot of time here, but not some other areas of the system, and that is an important issue going forward. And on the far right now, we know that key crisis type events also point us towards issues and around this diagram. And I live in Western Canada, and so a fair bit of our summer, I'd say 30 days were barely livable last August, early July, in terms of the degree of smoke here. People live in their basements, they leave town, they do whatever. So things are not good in terms of the pyrocene in these dimensions. So the Anthropocene is always present, but the system is very torqued by specific incidents and big issues. And so, how do you actually get a handle on that is one of the questions. So in the webinar series, we're in business schools of some form or another. And so we're trying to think about what we can do realistically in our business research and business education as professionals, because we spend our lives in this kind of organization and institution. So we're trying to drop it there. And many years ago, I had the chance to join different types of social science departments when I left grad school. But I chose business school, and primarily business school. I had a joint possibility, for instance, at NYU between the business and the sociology department, and another place in political science and business. But the business school, is an important platform for a lot of what happens with the Anthropocene. And unlike some of my environmental buddies and whatnot, who are still my buddies, although some maybe not, I always thought it was important to engage directly with those people who were, creating the problem, but, are involved in the problem. And so business school is a site for that. And in terms of trying to think about that, you guys have a systems approach in terms of level 1, 2, 3 questions. So I'm trying to think about leverage points and then practically how do you deal with these paradoxes as professionals, and then what do we do with our students? So I want to engage with those. And one of the ways I'm going to engage is with the JMI special issue that just came out on what's holding us back from devoting our research and teaching to climate crisis. And so Andy and I, Andy Hoffman on the left, and I have done a fair bit of work together over the last 15 years. Well, I've known Andy since the AMR special issue 1995. So we've known each other a very long time. But yeah, so some of that draws on that particular work. And I think Andy's going to be speaking in your webinar series, at least when I contacted him yesterday and we were talking. It seemed like that. So the theories, our article is really around the theories, identity, and work that we think academics in this area should kind of make explicit, try to surface for themselves and those around them, and then teaching and then new directions are part of that. So it does translate, though, into your question. So leverage points and reconfiguring, I think, is very much about trying to identify that your theories and what your identity is and your purpose in your work. So I want to move, address that really as one piece going forward in a second here. And then I do want to think about our paradoxes and difficulties as academics. I mean, we're ultimately evaluated by our business school colleagues and by those who are funding us and those who are organizations. And some of what we say is just not palatable. I work with oil sands companies, so I work with extreme versions of not palatable in some ways. So I recognize that tension. And then teaching, you guys have developed programs, but many universities have underdeveloped programs. So we need to discuss that. And the teaching, the personal is around these paradoxes, but the teaching is really both on dilemmas, but in alternative paths. And you guys have set out a formal path that we were just talking about to other programs. But some of it's identity based. What do people want to do when they leave based on their identity as students? What do they now identify with? And I'm not sure we want to counsel people out of going into business, but some people choose to just leave business based on what they've learned in these courses. So, all right. So for me, as you probably know, I'm a big tent institutionalist. So I'm pretty interested in culture, different forms of neo-structuralist, perhaps, I guess, culture and materiality. I really have spent a lot of time early on thinking about power and politics in my early work on networks and interlocks and so forth. But I've spent much more time recently on culture and materiality type issues than the power is above those for me. So I'm not really Bourdieusian in that sense. I'm sorry. I mean, they're not so entwined that all fields are, in that sort of stasis. I also think a fair bit about using some of the standard leverage points in institutional theory, like normative, regulative type dimensions that you see, cognitive dimensions, entrepreneurial mindsets. These matter. And what you're trying to do, at least in my view, is to generate different scenarios and opportunities in people's minds that they think they can pursue and devote resources to actively. Realistic scenarios that they think they can pursue, not just imaginaries, but some intermediate imaginaries where they can make some moves, and scenarios are like that. So one of the things that we've talked about, Andy and I and others, we've talked about Anthropocene Society and having nearby fields, and then these are dimensions, and you're trying to get down to beneath the surface to deeper values in the cultural system, because ultimately at the end of the day, you can't go there very directly with folks, but you are trying to change their mindsets, and you are trying to tap their values about what they really believe in if they're going to try to improve things like the Anthropocene, or in our societies. And that's a tough ask with business people. You don't have enough time with each person to make that kind of difference, and B, they don't want to go there directly. They're spending time trying to work on products and processes. So I won't talk quite as much about engaging with business on the street, but I do think one of the ways is through the folks we train, because as you know, we get lots of time with our students compared to like with anybody we're working with in projects in biz school. And we are part of what we do, although it's less obvious in 2025 that it's supposed to be, we socialize folks to some degree. And so, that is how you pull in culture and values and materiality and ethics that we're discussing. So, and then I do think, we need to be explicit about the types of scenarios and realities we're building for folks. We know that imaginaries and strong pictorial and strong visions of what futures are like are persuasive, both in positive and negative ways. And so we've always found those to be very powerful in terms of that persuasion. So just by way of story at this level one and really around this big tent and how you might change things. So one of the stories is really about setting up the center, the Canadian Center for CSR that Roy Sotheby, I don't know if you know Roy, but Roy Sotheby and I did together. He started and then he left. He went to Victoria, but so our then Dean Joseph Doucette was working a lot with oil majors like Suncor and whatnot and trying to get funding. And so they had a big ask on natural resource side to do natural resource economics, but we were able to be a third of that grant by focusing on organizations and community level sustainability. So, they were quite willing to have us on that grant at the time, and sustainability in 2011, 12, 13 was a super hot issue. So of course they wanted it because of the community nature. So we got a fair bit of funding and were able to set up that center. And we were able to engage with our colleagues because they understood institutions, from an economics point of view, it might have been North or Douglas kind of view of institutions as rules of the game and regulations. But they were able to understand you were coming from that place. And the bigger tent meant they would accept that, okay, we want to think more about culture and behavioral stuff. That's why we're hired. So they were willing to add us into the equation, as it were, into the grant. But by being bigger tent and flexible in our theoretic approach, it did allow us, to engage. And Andy's found that to be true with systems theory at Michigan in trying to work with folks. We know that systems theory, is definitely the basis for a lot of science-based engagement. So that's helped with funding as well. So just to continue, I'm also, at least for me, and I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I just want to, part of my identity is really, and what I do is around being an interpretive empiricist. So I work on stakeholder approaches to, life cycle analysis and assessment. I work on Indigenous community stuff, but I also spend a fair bit of time. I'm teaching data analytics and I'm teaching quant methods to the PhDs right now. And so I spend time on generative AI and generative AI pitches. And, I'm working on something on generative AI with the Edmonton Police Service, looking at text analysis of some of what they're doing. So I find that by being empirical and by doing work on the ground and in experiments, that people take you more seriously in this space. And I think that's one of the great strengths of being an academic in this space. If you're an active researcher and you're actually just willing to talk to people about your research, it gives you a certain level of credibility, even if people go, I don't quite get it, or I don't agree with you. They know you're engaged. You're trying to find answers. You're trying to do something that you believe is important and bring it to the table. So in the future energy systems, the University of Alberta has several future energy system groups, and we're all organized together across departments in the same way that you are. And I'm part of the remediation of land and water systems groups, and I became a co-PI of that group several years ago. And we've been working on things like wetland redesign, different types of products and processes, some of which were in those experiments that I talked about, and we're trying to pitch these products to seed funders and to businesses. So as a result, on the upper right, this sustainability community portion and sustainability resilient landscapes, those two were added in directly from the biz school to what was being done in energy systems and land and water and reclamation being done by engineering and life science. So as a result, we were able to, build jointly some sort of process flow system diagram to help design the work that we were doing over a several year period. And we've rebuilt it a few times, but it is very useful, I think, on the big picture to be able to build from one's theory with the different departments and try to figure out what a strategic artifact might look like that connects your work together in the same way that we would in other areas. So, yeah. So the second part that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll open it up for questions, is really trying to think about the teaching and professional paradox portion a little bit more. So I teach courses in this space. I've helped design and present on corporate sustainability course on the right, but Matt Kingston is the main person in charge of that now. Joel Gemmon was doing it before, and then I do the clean technology course on the left between the biz school and the science departments. So the clean tech course has 4 frames: strategy and innovation, tech frame, economic frame, and management frame. As you can see, going across, and then this tech, econ, and political are rolled up into the strategy and innovation again at the very end with the project. So we start with this, and then we end with the final project that's out there. But the 4 frames, the tech, econ, political, and management that are rolled in here, really has worked pretty well over a 13-year period, frankly. Course has been well received. It's usually oversubscribed. And one of the reasons it works well is, it starts with the tech frame. So people are on a similar page. And so they say, technology, and yeah, you can move them to assemblages and so forth as you move along. But I mean, they still want to see what a battery system looks like. They still want to see, But then you can build on to the econ frame, so that, and then you kind of move them to politics, and then you move them to to management and really innovation. And then they stack together, and then you start moving them towards, okay, you need to have deeper changes in culture, deeper changes in value. And by the end of that period, they're more willing to accept it because you kind of immerse them more slowly from the place where they've been to place where you want them to go. And so that's been pretty good. The corporate sustainability version has been more for us. Joel's stamp, the way it was originally designed was redesigned by Joel Gemmon, who's now off at George Washington, and Matt's teaching based on that one. It's really a perspectives view where you've got different topics such as microplastics and so forth in the early modules, and then and ESG, and then you pull people towards theory, where you got relational theory and durational perspectives and different types of evolutionary perspectives. So near the end of the course, so by starting with topics, the idea is in getting people into it and then moving them slowly to theory, then they start realizing how the topics are shaped by theory rather than starting with theory and going to topics. If you start theory heavy, people just they just give up, right? Whereas people really do like to think about topics. So another way in on the teaching side is by starting with topics rather than starting by technology, but starting by topics and moving to theory. So that's just a different design that's worked for us. As we also have a bunch of PhD projects on the left that are going on, with some of the specific students that I'm working with. And then we also, in those courses, where we try to work with local businesses. So the Edmonton Hydrogen Hub Plan is one we're involved in, and the Smart City Development one is a project that the clean tech guys did. And there's AI and CCU, artificial intelligence and carbon capture and utilization and storage that's being done in Strathcona, and lithium battery recycling. And so, having practical projects at the end of the day in these courses with businesses makes a lot of difference. And it brings up that tension with students. So one of the tensions in that last clean tech term in May, and I'm about to start teaching it for a spring semester in a few weeks. The team mostly from India, who are international students as MBAs, and a couple from science and three from biz, wanted to look at coal because coal use, as you know, on the right has only gone up. And, it's not a good situation. India is expanding rapidly, depends greatly on coal, and so they were trying to search for other alternatives. So they looked at different sectors, and they were looking at power and heavy equipment, and they looked at ATCO, which is local, and Rolls-Royce as exemplars. So they were able to identify people who had cut back on coal. I don't know about net zero. That's not really, Rolls-Royce says this and that, but net zero is like net zero is ExxonMobil's version of net zero. But anyway, they're trying to do some replacement and whatnot. And so there were some strategies that could be used. But then the tension is ultimately when they looked at nuclear power's yield. Nuclear power just looked like a better, longer-term option. And as you guys know, in France, you guys have been very committed to a third, maybe 2/5 of the sector of new power, but traditionally 70% of power, with heavy nuclear usage. And so, yeah, it's very appealing as a different solution. And so many parts of the world that are trying to look at substitution or trying to think about whether your model is the model to use, honestly. And they were not sure at the end of the day. So I'd be curious to hear in your own views how, what you thought of that. Sorry, I'm being fished by my phone. All right. So that's it for me as a warm up. You can see how my identity and what I'm doing affects how I see these leverage points. You can see some of what we're doing on teaching that works between business and sustainability parts of the university, and that students are trying to work on the ground with some of these dilemmas on projects with companies. And then really at the end of our article, we make this statement that we need to make aspirational statements and be committed. And we need to push harder than we are doing. I mean, Andy, AJH, says, if we don't, we're doomed. I'm just hoping, or we have little hope. I mean, I'm more, that's our own paradoxical tension with the way we work. He's become, because he spends all his time on this domain. After 30 years of doing it, 35 years of doing it, I think he's got the doom. And for me, many years back, I've decided to spend half of my time, 2/3 of my time on environmental and sustainability, knowing that I can't spend all my time on it. Otherwise, I will end up there. So it's my own balance point. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dev. This is this is very interesting, and maybe I can either open the floor directly if somebody has a question, a pressing question,